The theme of this meeting is Remember the Past, Inspire the Future. We come from tough people. You know that. But to remind you that our ancestors were tough, they were independent, they were self-sufficient, and I'll give you a few examples of that. There's an old book called Larion's Law. Larion was from Keynote, and this happened before 1900. A miner killed Larion's son, so Larion killed the miner. Miners decided they were going to hang him, but Larion took off and went over into the Kobuk country. During the winter, he went over to Canada. When they recognized him in Canada, they locked him up. When the ice started out on the Yukon River, he somehow got free, and went to the river to watch the ice go out with everybody else. When they recognized him, he jumped on the ice, and the last time they saw him, he was going around a bend on an ice floe. In July, he showed up in Kayakuk. Now that's tough. I don't think the miners ever got him. In the books, Shadows on the Kayakuk and The Edge of Nowhere by Sidney Huntington and Jimmy Huntington, they tell of their mother, who was taken by the U.S. Marshal down the river by steamboat and over to Nome to be a witness at a trial. The trial didn't end till the middle of winter. Rather than wait for spring, she left Nome and walked to Kotzebue, and walked over the hills back into the Kayakuk River country, all alone in the middle of winter. Now that's really tough. Bobby Vent was from Cutoff. He was in Kayakuk and headed up the Kayakuk River to go home. He broke through the ice on the Kayakuk River. He got out, got his dog team out, and they pulled the loaded sled out. It was 40 below. He survived. Now that's tough. 100 years ago, my mother was 9 years old, and they would go from Nalata to the Yukon Flats for spring camp. In the spring, they'd build a big raft, and you've seen some of them, see pictures of them, with a tent on the raft, a stove outside of the tent, and they drift back down the river. They stayed every night along the river with somebody they knew. The river was much more populated. There were a lot of people back on the river at that time. But when they were going from the ladder to the flats, her dad is out front on snowshoes, breaking trail for the dog team, and she was 9 years old, running behind the team. Now that's tough. Pauline Carlo worked hard, raised a family of trappers and miners and fishermen and pilots. They all work hard. She did it, and it was very tough for her. In 1915, the chiefs met in Nenana with Judge James Wickersham, and they were asking him to keep new people out of the country. They wanted to live their life without interference. They were trying to save their lifestyle. They got to the meeting in Nenana by paddling their canoes up the swift Tenerife River. Now that's tough. But you don't have to go back 80 to 100 years. I'll tell a little story about John Sackett. When he was a senator and president of Doyon, he negotiated a contract with the oil companies, and they set a signing date in Anchorage. A number of us went with John up to the meeting to witness the signing. About 10 minutes after the appointed hour, two representatives came in and said, we want to make some changes to the contract. John stood up and said, I came here to sign a contract, not negotiate one, and walked out. A few minutes later, he came back in with the president of the company and they signed the contract. Now that's tough. John was a tough negotiator. As senator, he was chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He worked hard and got many projects for his district, but he also helped people from other districts. And he was part of a very tough team that you don't see very often. Senator Frank Ferguson from Kotzebue, Al Adams from Kotzebue. We had some very good, tough legislators. But we have to be tough. Our parents faced many challenges in a short period of time. Change has been constant and sometimes devastating. We survived probably the worst tuberculosis epidemic ever recorded in the world. We also survived measles, diphtheria, and discrimination, as well as other problems. Nobody knows, but I've heard numbers as high as 80% of the native people died from tuberculosis. The first newcomers who came into the country were fur traders and prospectors and miners, but the rapid change was brought by the military. When they came in 1940 and 41, that event changed Alaska forever. Language, lifestyle, culture were all under pressure, and the change was coming fast. The result was that Native people became a minority in 1939. In one lifetime, we went from trappers to the space age. We went from no phones to cell phones to internet and now live TV. Tuberculosis ravaged our villages. Villages were abandoned or moved to other places and families disappeared. Many survivors by 1950 were debilitated, and we know the many of them. But today, we are regaining our strength. We will not just survive, we will thrive by our own efforts. We will overcome the threats of alcohol, drugs, discrimination, and the kind of corruption that resulted in the Fairbanks 4. The foundation of future generations is being laid right now. Change has happened so fast, there's not enough time to train locals to benefit from development. The new population brought competition for fish and game. Competition for subsistence resources makes it hard and maybe impossible to live in a village without a job. Growth and development has not provided jobs for rural Alaska in the numbers they should, and it won't unless Alaska makes a major effort to train workforce and insist on local hire. A couple of years ago, I was in Ottawa, Canada, and when I picked up the newspaper, it said, Ottawa to boost skilled trades. You need a skilled workforce for development. Alaska should recognize that and provide adequate training. The Chamber of Commerce and a dozen more organizations constantly promote development, and they make two promises. One promise, development will solve the unemployment problem, and development will solve the state budget problem. Let's look at those promises. In 1950, the Sitka Chamber of Commerce said that Sitka was a fishing village, a fishing town, and it needed year-round employment. They got a pulp mill. The town went from 3,000 people to 6,000. There were more people unemployed when the pulp mill opened than before the pulp mill. Didn't solve the employment problem. And for the city, the budget went out of whack. They had to build new schools, provide new police protection, new water and sewer lines. Development didn't solve either the unemployment or budget problem. In 1950 again, there were sawmills in Haines, Juneau, Sitka, Ketchikan, Metlakatla. Instead of supporting the small mills, the state convinced Congress to have large timber sales for an international pulp mill. So the small sawmills went out of business. Their workers lost jobs. When the pulp mill closed, it left a large population without jobs, and the profits left the state and the country. That's not a good model for development. Oil was the biggest development, and it did the same thing. In 1970, state population was around 300,000 people. Beginning in 1977, the population more than doubled. Today, there are more people unemployed after the oil pipeline than before the oil pipeline. What happened to the budget? 1970, the budget was about $300 million for the state with no deficit spending. Today, state budget is about $8 billion with over $1 billion in deficit spending. There are more people unemployed today than before the pipeline. Didn't solve the unemployment problem and didn't solve the state budget problem. The state has spent billions in schools, roads, water, sewer, electricity, and police protection to take care of the growth in population. So what can be done about it? Before the next big project, the state needs to use the time to train a workforce. 400,000 people came to Alaska because of the pipeline. Most of them got jobs. Most rural residents did not get jobs. The population could go over 1 million people with the next development. At that point, we will go more into the minority. Things will get worse. It's impossible to feed a family with subsistence alone. In order to benefit from development, training is needed. Politicians don't seem to make the connection between population growth and budget growth. Right now, even as they struggle with the state budget, they're calling for development. That's insane. History proves that. The state puts its priorities in the wrong place. Priorities should be put Alaskans to work. It seems politicians worry too much about the profits of big business. The companies do very well at taking care of their own shareholders. The state's job is to look after its citizens. Don't take this as anti-development. We need to use our resources. We are a resource-wealthy state, although you wouldn't know it when you see the people begging on the street corners. We should support local companies that hire locally. We need to build wealth in Alaska, not ship it overseas. The world wants our wealth and resources. We should make them pay for it. Just a note on the environment. American Indians legends predict that Indians will be world leaders. Speeches by early Indian chiefs are worth reading. One of my favorites is Chief Seattle. When he surrendered, he talked about earth as being the giver of life. He described the smell of fresh air after rain and the beauty of clear streams. They cherished the earth. The world needs leaders who protect the environment. Doyon has a good board of directors. They have a tough board of directors and staff, and they have a tough job to do. They do what is best for the shareholders. Take a look at what Ben Franklin said. I will study and prepare myself, and when the opportunity knocks, I'll be ready. And if you look at your board of directors, you can see the result of learning, life learning or academic learning. It pays off. Capitalism is the best economic system, but it is being abused in practice. Corporations are responsible for 90% of the wealth going to 1% of the residents. Our businesses, we should set an example for the rest of the country. Land claims was a 5-year effort and a 5-year struggle. It was fought without adequate resources. We started with $9 in the bank, for the young people here who didn't know, with no office, no typewriter, no phone. Many people contributed $2 at the urging of the Thunder Times. One representative mortgaged his home in order to participate. Against opposition from the state, from Chamber of Commerce, newspaper editorials, we moved Congress to do something never done before. That was tough. Now that we have land, are we tough enough to hold on to it? Legislators tried twice to pass a land tax. Only cities and boroughs tax land now, but it failed both times. You can expect the legislature will again try. But there are shortcomings in the settlement. There is no protection for land. It was not a negotiated settlement. There was no give and take. When it passed, it was take it or leave it. But there are villages today who might want to put their land into trust. They should have the support of the regions and of AFM. Without land, without land, there will be no Indian community. If that happens, Congress will have accomplished what they have never been able to do for more than 200 years. Termination. No land ownership, no sovereignty, no visible Indians. Benjamin Franklin said, if we make ourselves sheep, the wolves will eat us. Stay tough. To the young people, there are many challenges ahead yet. But we come from tough people. Make our ancestors proud.